Tensions escalating after the U.S. shoots down a Syrian fighter jet targeting U.S.-backed forces. Now Russia is saying it's going to target us. Welcome, everyone. I am Trish Regan in for Neil Cavuto, and this is Your World. Russia's defense ministry now saying it will now treat U.S. coalition planes in Syria as targets after the U.S. shot down a Syrian Air Force jet west of the Euphrates. Let's go to Kristen Fisher in Washington with the very latest. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, Trish. Well, to give you an idea of how big a deal this is, the last time the U.S. shot down a warplane in air-to-air combat was almost 20 years ago. Now the U.S. has shot down a Syrian plane for the first time ever. And the Russians, who support Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, are warning Washington that any U.S. or U.S.-led coalition planes that fly west of the Euphrates River in Syria will be considered targets. Now, the Russians didn't explicitly say that they would shoot them down, but still, this marks a major escalation over a battlefield that was already very chaotic and confusing. Now, the Russians have also threatened to stop using the deconfliction hotline. Remember, they've threatened that in the past, and this afternoon, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said the U.S. will try to reestablish that line sometime in the next few hours.
I'm confident that we are still communicating between our Operations Center and the Russian Federation Operations Center, and I'm also confident that our forces have the capability to take care of themselves.
Now, the Pentagon says the reason this F-18 shot down this Russian-made Syrian warplane on Sunday was because it had just bombed U.S.-backed forces nearby. Russia called it an act of aggression, but U.S. Central Command says, quote, the coalition does not seek to fight Syrian regime, Russian, or pro-regime forces partner with them, but will not hesitate to defend coalition or partner forces from any threat. And the threat in the region is also intensifying, this time from Iran. Yesterday, it launched 6 missiles into ISIS strongholds in Syria, very close to where some U.S.-backed forces are based. And Trish, they weren't given any warning.
All right, Kristen, thank you very much. So what do we do? How should the U.S. be dealing with this? Let's go right now to retired U.S. Army intelligence officer Tony Shaffer. Good to see you.
Good to be on.
What do you propose?
Look, it's chaos, and we're doing the best we can to make sense of that chaos. There's a couple things. General Dunford just said, and I believe this to be completely true, we still have communications with the Russians, but there's a couple of things we have to consider. First off, the Russians are invited, we're not. And the Russians are trying to retain Bashar al-Assad and the regime, and we're not. So there's some fundamental conflicts there to begin with, and then we just talked about the Iranians. The Iranians are playing their own game for their own purposes.
Well, is this some kind of proxy war then with Russia, essentially? I mean, we want one thing and they want something else.
Yeah, look, we believe in some ways we're talking about, we've been calling it the Damascus Pact, where you've got essentially a Cold War setup. The old Warsaw Pact faced us off against NATO. Now we see the Russians, Syria, and Iran kind of playing their own game as the Warsaw Pact did. And we proposed as one of our answers to help organize our side as an era of NATO, if you will, Gulf and Red Sea Treaty Organization, because part of what we're not doing well, Trish, is we're not defining what we want to accomplish. But
I thought we wanted al-Assad gone. I mean, hasn't that been defined?
It's aspirational, but then what? We cannot simply remove him and then leave Syria in chaos like we did Libya. Remember, we got rid of Gaddafi, learned a harsh lesson about the fact you get the bad guy, and then if the bad...
we did the same thing in Iraq as well, and then we got out of Iraq after, and you see where that led.
Precisely.
So I hear you. So we need to have some kind of game plan in place, and there's nothing? Are you telling me, Colonel, they have absolutely no plan for this?
There is. I've talked to very senior Pentagon leaders, and we have not been able to achieve under the Obama White House, and the Trump White House is better but not complete, about thinking things through. What's next? Like if we get Bashar al-Assad, what next? We've got to figure out what do we wish to achieve and what's the cost. Remember, we're talking about here American lives being jeopardized for what? We've done a lot of stuff there, but we have to figure out what do we wish to achieve and then seek to use all of our resources and leveraging other resources to achieve that. We have not come to that point.
I guess one of the things that stuns me is that we've been around this problem now for a while, and we know that Bashar al-Assad is killing his own people with chemical weapons, and we know that he's not a good guy, and we know we want him gone. Why do we not have some ideas? Why haven't we reached some kind of consensus on what it is that should be done? Because
you have overlapping interests within the region. Again, the Iranians are supporting Bashar al-Assad. The Russians are supporting him. So this is where the conditions for that Cold War set itself up.
So so the Russians know what they want.
Oh, clearly, and they're acting on it, and that's been one of the issues, is that we're actively coming up against against some of their own internal objectives regarding Bashar al-Assad. Now, there's been negotiations that we're now back of. Notably, during the Obama administration, John Kerry and our State Department got completely kicked out of those negotiations. We didn't even have a seat at the table. Now we do. So some of this is really trying to right the bad policies of the Obama administration, and then at the same time trying to figure out what exactly we wish to achieve long-term regarding stability within the region.
So where does this leave us? I mean, in terms of Russia, in terms of Putin, we know what his goals are. We haven't defined necessarily our goals. Are we just basically saying, okay, you know, Syria is yours to handle?
No, not at all. General Dunford, during his confirmation hearings 2 years ago, said that Russia is our largest competitor and threat. They really are. And the Pentagon now, as you've seen, is pushing back. We will coordinate. We will do things to prevent fratricide, but we will not back down. This is new. Again, we haven't shot down an aircraft since 1999. So we do have a new sheriff in town. There's new things coming. What we have to do now is, like we did during the Cold War, define what we're willing to do and make sure the other side understands that. We have to set up clear objectives for Syria and make it known what we wish to accomplish. Part of the problem is we're supporting the Peshmerga, which everybody thinks is a good idea. We're also supporting some of these anti-Assad forces, which was what was being attacked here. And you know, they're anti-ISIS, but they're anti-Assad too, which then puts them in conflict with the very forces we're trying to deal with regarding the Russians.
Okay, so we need to make some decisions. We need to have a plan, and we need to know what comes next.
Right,
because
precisely.
Too often we get in there. We destroy certain regimes, which probably need to be destroyed, but then we're stuck with chaos afterwards because there's no plan.
Tony Zinni, Central Command under President Clinton, would often be asked, can you do this militarily? And Tony Zinni would say, yeah, but then what? It's the then what that, Trish, we don't do well with, and it's something we really have to get right here.
Colonel Schaefer, thank you so much. Good to have you here. All right, I want to move to London right now. UK police trying to ease tensions after a van plows into a group of Muslims outside a mosque, killing one person and injuring at least 9 others. And now we're learning more about the 47-year-old suspect who is facing a terror charge. Let's go to Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, who has the latest. Hi, Catherine.
Well, thanks, Trish. 2 new attacks in Europe today involving vehicles as weapons. The most recent attack happened just hours ago along the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Investigators there say a driver rammed into a police van. Video shows thick yellow smoke pouring from what appears to be the suspect's vehicle. Fox News is told the suspect had an AK-47 as well as a gas tank in that vehicle. French officials say the attacker was badly burned and died at the scene. The suspect was known to French intelligence services and under surveillance. This is a special security category that only applies to individuals who are considered a serious threat to national security, and it's considered the highest level of warning. This attack happened just hours after police in London say a driver in a van plowed into Muslims outside a mosque in North London, injuring at least 9 people. Investigators say one man died at the scene, but somebody was giving him first aid before the attack, and it's unclear exactly what killed him. Video shows people kicking the man on the ground, the suspect, but an imam at the mosque says he and other people managed to protect the suspect. The London Police Commissioner said today that this is an act of terrorism.
We take all forms of hate crime incredibly seriously, and we want to stop people becoming violent extremists of any sort, however we can. Clearly, it takes more than just the police.
British media report the mosque in North London has really done a lot in the last decade to turn around its image after it was linked to the 2001 shoe bomber Richard Reed, as well as a poison plot just 2 years later. Trish.
Thank you so much,
You're welcome.
Catherine Herridge. All right, stocks kicking off the week here with some pretty good gains and more records broken. How about that? The Dow and the S&P closing at record highs, everyone. You got tech stocks rebounding a bit as well. Check it out, up 144. Investors also keeping a close watch on Congress. GOP lawmakers considering canceling the August recess to get tax cuts done. House Speaker Paul Ryan will be setting the tone with a major speech on tax reform. That's happening tomorrow afternoon, and Neil is going to have live coverage on it for you right around on the Fox Business Network. That's 12 p.m. Cavuto, coast to coast on FBN. Do not miss it. Less than a week after the shooting, some in the media seem to be blaming Republican Congressman Steve Scalise for this tragedy. No, they're actually blaming the victim. The victim who is still lying in a hospital right now. Where's the outcry over this one? And imagine if anything at all was said of a Democrat like this. Then, Who is going to come out on top in Georgia? The last-minute scramble for votes is on as Republicans and Democrats hang everything. It's breaking right now. A big change coming for Sean Spicer's job at the White House. Our John Roberts has the breaking news for you right now. Hey, John.
Trish, good afternoon to you. This is something that's been in the works now for quite a while, a number of weeks, really since the time that James Comey was fired. And the president believes that his communication shop kind of fell down in the job, even though they were asked to respond within about 45 minutes with a full national plan for rolling out that the president had fired the FBI director. The president was considering this over the course of his recent foreign trip to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Italy. But now it looks like it's really well in the works, and that is that Sean Spicer will now no longer take on the role of press secretary, and at least on a day-to-day basis, he will actually receive a promotion. Right now, the flow chart of the White House really goes, you got the press shop over here, headed by the press secretary, then you got the communications shop over here, headed by a communications director. That was Mike Dubke, who you remember, Trish, resigned a few weeks ago. Sean Spicer has really been filling both roles in the interim, but now he'll be bumped up above that to a new position. They don't quite know what to call it just yet, but it will likely be at the level of a deputy chief of staff, and he will oversee both the press office and the communications shop. And this, the president believes, as does Sean Spicer and Reince Priebus, really plays to Sean Spicer's strength, because when he was at the RNC, when he was on Capitol Hill, he was always a behind-the-scenes player, working on strategy, as opposed to being the person who's out here every day ducking the slings and arrows of the media as they question him during the daily press briefing. So he will now move in the near future to a full-time behind-the-scenes role, even though the president still would like to see him come out every once in a while, and he may do that. So it's likely that we'll see Sarah Huckabee Sanders, if not move into the full press secretary job, at least be at the podium more often, and then there will be a communications director as well who is appointed. So Spicer will be the overseer, again, at a deputy chief of staff level, over both the press shop and the communications shop. So for Spicer, it's a promotion, though a lot of people were looking at this as earlier, at least before this plan came out, as Spicer being shoved aside. I can tell you, Trish, that's definitely not the case. He's moving into a more elevated role, and one the White House and the president really believes plays to his strengths. Trish?
All right. Thank you very much. John Roberts, everyone. Republican Congressman Steve Scalise continuing his recovery after last week's tragic shooting. But that's not stopping some in the media who seem to be suggesting he asked for this. Listen.
It's time to ask whether the attack on the United States Congress yesterday was foreseeable, predictable, and to some degree self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted? Come on. All right, I want to go right now to former Secret Service agent Dan Bongino and media watcher Joe Concha. Self-inflicted? What did he mean by that, Joe Concha?
Scott Pelley, let's make this clear, is not a reckless pundit trying to give out a provocative, shocking statement like we see in cable news every day. He is the anchor, or was, of the CBS Evening News. Walter Cronkite, that sound you hear right now, is turning over in his grave. You can't make statements like that where it says it was self-inflicted, because obviously the reaction from any sane, sober American would be, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, the other thing is, and people should know this, and I've worked at CBS Evening News, those words are very carefully thought out. It's not as though they're just talking like we do in cable. They write all this stuff out. It's heavily scripted. So, you know, Dan, he knew what he was writing. He wrote that ahead of time. He delivered that message, and he chose to use that word, self-inflicted. I mean, isn't that, doesn't that speak volumes about where some members of the media and the left are right now?
Well, the media is the left, Trish. I mean, I'm not willing to say otherwise. These people have grown up in schools of journalism where they've been indoctrinated in critical theory and far-left ideology. I mean, that's a horrifying, embarrassing, disgusting statement to make. Self-inflicted while Scalise is in the hospital recovering in critical condition. I mean, don't you have any pride or dignity in your network? Can't you rise above the moment just while the guy is in critical condition and wait till he can at least stand on his 2 feet again? Remember, this isn't a problem on both sides. I refuse to accept that. There are isolated incidents of this on both sides, but as an epidemic of violent talk and violent rhetoric, this is almost exclusively owned by the far left. Not all Democrats, but by the far left.
Look, I do think that the left has engaged in this in some pretty obvious ways. I mean, the Kathy Griffin, for example, or the Julius Caesar being Donald Trump and getting stabbed. I think we've seen some examples, but I don't necessarily think that the right is saintly as well. I mean, Joe, we have reached a state in this country right now where we have seemed to have lost all sense of decency, all sense of humanity. People are just on the attack, I think, in a way that has been completely unprecedented. But to see the anchor of the CBS Evening News, Scott Pelley, take that on and suggest that somehow it's Congressman Scalise's fault that this happened, that's taken it to levels we haven't seen.
I have a new term. We've all heard about one upsmanship. This is one downsmanship. And think about it. After the attack, you had President Trump calling for unity, and that was even applauded by Stephen Colbert. Yeah. The House Majority Leader, the House Minority Leader, you have Democrats and Republicans praying on the field. Politicians actually acted, for the most part, responsibly here. But harmony doesn't work with some members of the media in 2017.
Is the mainstream media becoming a joke at this point? I mean, everybody needs to take them effectively with a grain of salt because you know where the bias is?
Look at the numbers that we've seen lately, particularly from that Harvard study. New York Times, 87% negative coverage. CNN and NBC, 93% negative coverage of this administration. I get it's going to skew negative. When you get to numbers like that, that shows me a reflex for the negative and an agenda, Trish.
Joe, good to see you. Thank you very much. Dan, good to see you. Thank you for your insight. All right, everyone, the president is under investigation. He's not under investigation. Here's what we do know. This confusion is over the top. Does that mean it's time for his tweets to stop?
Mr. President, are you under investigation by the special counsel? Mr. President, are you under investigation by the special counsel?
Have you been notified of an investigation? And the answer, as I said yesterday, is no. The situation on Friday that created the press coverage over the weekend was in response to a Washington Post story that had 5 anonymous sources. Yeah. So in one sense, could you imagine if the president did have the opportunity to respond?
And that's the president's personal lawyer. He's saying that nobody has ever notified the president that he's under investigation.
The president's team playing defense, all because of a single tweet where the president said, and I quote, "I am being investigated for firing the FBI director by the man who told me to fire the FBI director." Witch hunt. If only he had listened to Neil, right? Remember this?
Mr. President, it's not the fake news media that's your problem. It's you. It's not just your tweeting, it's your scapegoating. It's your refusal to see that sometimes you're the one who's feeding your own beast.
Bottom line here, you got a whole lot of confusion over this case. So should the president just drop the tweets altogether? Or should he keep them going because that's how he connects with his base and gets out his message? I'm joined right now with their thoughts, Robin Byro, Ashley Hayek, and Madison Giassotto. Good to have you all here. Madison, you like the tweeting. I know you like the tweeting. You say it helps him to connect with his peeps, but doesn't it get him in a little trouble along the way?
You know, when we look at this tweet specifically, I think this tweet was meant to be satirical and really bring light to the ridiculousness of the fact that the President of the United States could be put under investigation for taking the advice of the same exact person that could potentially be investigating him. I think this is ridiculous. But when we go back to the general idea of whether the President should be tweeting, I think a lot of people always say, you know, yes, he should be tweeting because this is a direct line of communication between him and the American people. True, but I think we need to take it one step further in saying that we're in the 21st century, and I think part of this comes with the increased technology and use of social media. And I would encourage not only our president, but all of our political leaders to continue to advance with the times and stop living in the past. I think social media is going to be an integral part of politics moving forward, and I think our politicians should be using this.
I hear you on a lot of this. I think one of the challenges with Twitter is that it's so short, right? You get 140 characters, and you got to get it all into that. Or maybe you can have a string of tweets, but the challenge here, Ashley, is that when you're doing things in such a brief, with such brevity, you're not able to convey the nuance, right, of a particular discussion point. And I think in this particular case, he might have been just responding to the Washington Post. Sort of, it was like, if I am under investigation, I shouldn't be because there's no crime here. But instead, in that spur-of-the-moment moment, we got a very different kind of feel, which basically suggested to the world that he was under investigation.
Well, it's 140 characters, and you can't hear tone in tweets. Basically, I have to agree. I'm glad that our president. I'm glad our president uses Twitter. I'm sure what drives most, political people nuts is that they're used to being able to control the social media message and keep their candidate, their client on message, and this president wants to talk to his base. For example, the travel ban. He uses the term ban. Now, it's up to the Supreme Court to determine whether or not it's legal. However, his base wants a ban, and that's why he was put into office, is because he's not following within the norms, the typical, the normal political rhetoric and being politically correct, and he's willing to put himself out there, and quite frankly, mainstream media just eats it up every time.
But the problem is, Raman, he's putting himself out there, and I agree with Madison and Ashley in that it's good to connect to the base, and the base wants to hear certain things, but the flip side of this is you've got a rabid left right now who wants to find him guilty of something somehow, some way. And is he running the risk of providing them unintentionally with ammunition?
Absolutely, Trish. We just heard from Neil. I'm sorry, was that meant for me? We just heard from Neil Cavuto that the president is his own worst enemy. I've got one of my favorite tweets that I can agree with is the one from August 1st of 2014, where he says, if you read my last number of tweets, only one opinion can be formed, that our president and therefore leader is grossly incompetent. Well, reading from his most recent tweets, I tend to agree with that statement. So yes, I do think that he is his own worst enemy. And, you know, time and time again, we're told one thing, and then it turns out, you know, they'll trot the cleanup crew afterward to come in and say that the president, that's not what he intended to say. That he granted it's only 140 characters, but they'll put out these people and say, you know, that's not how you should interpret
and everybody
this.
says, oh gosh, if only he hadn't tweeted that. Madison, if you were advising him right now, if you were working in the Oval Office, what would you tell him?
I would tell him to keep tweeting, because like I said before, this is not only a way for him to connect, but this is also a way for him to stay in the future and continue to advance. Keep in mind that last year was the first time that millennials were able to vote in as large of numbers as baby boomers in the older generation. So the future is in the hands of millennials, and millennials are on Twitter, millennials are on Facebook. And the reality is, yes, Facebook is a short
would you say, hey, maybe do that, but let's, you know, let's maybe edit them a little bit, Ashley? Maybe put them through another set of eyes first so that we don't land in any hot water that we shouldn't be landing in?
I don't think so. I think he needs to keep his base focused. He's motivating people to continue to support him. And you know what? If the left wants to keep attacking him, they'll attack him over anything at this point. That's very, very clear. So keep it coming, keep it going, and keep the conversation strong.
I keep saying this. He has single-handedly made Twitter relevant, everyone. You gotta be on Twitter if you want to know what the president's thinking. Thanks so much, the whole team. Appreciate you being here. All right, from the White House to the People's House, the stakes are incredibly high in tomorrow's hotly contested special election in Georgia. Don't believe me? Then believe the money. We're talking about a lot of it here. A lot of money being spent. And attention, summer travelers. Tropical storms may be brewing in both the Gulf and the Atlantic. It's early for that. Could this be a sign of things to come? We're on it. See you back here right after this. Hi, the political stakes are in tomorrow's special House election in Georgia. Then all you have to do is follow the money, because the congressional race between Republican Karen Handel and Democrat Jon Ossoff is the most expensive race ever. Our Jonathan Siri has the very latest on the last-minute scramble for votes in this one. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Trish, you know, the 6th district race may be grabbing all of the national headlines, but the two candidates are bringing in some big names with strong Georgia ties to help them in their various campaigns. Over the weekend, Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue and Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price stumped for Republican Karen Handel, while Congressman and civil rights icon John Lewis campaigned for Democrat Jon Ossoff.
With this election, it will indicate that people are prepared to change. I think many people would see the handwriting on the wall.
It's time to be knocking on those doors. It's time to be making those calls. It's time to be sending those emails. It's time to be making certain that you're asking every single individual that you see within the 6th district, have you voted?
The Real Clear Politics average of polls shows Ossoff with a slight lead of 49.3% to Handel's 47.8%. That's way too close to call, but it's extraordinary that Democrats are even competitive in a district that favors establishment Republicans.
This is exactly the type of district they hope they can win if they can retake the House in 2018. They need to win. A lot of them are going to be these suburban, these fast.
The polls by linking Ossoff to Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi and other California liberals. Late last week, Handel announced that she and some of her neighbors had received threatening letters containing a white powder. The Ossoff campaign announced that it has beefed up security after receiving some threats as well. Now, this is already the most expensive congressional race in U.S. history, with expenditures, campaign expenses expecting to top $50 million. Trish?
All right, thank you so much, Jonathan Siri. My
Surely.
next guest says the reason they're spending so much money is because this is a must-win for both parties. Wall Street Journal's senior video reporter Shelby Holliday is here on set with me. Good to see you, Shelby.
Great to be
here.
here.
They both want to win it. They're both spending lots of money. Why is it so critical?
It's critical for both parties. The stakes are so high. This race is making people do things they've never done before. I was just down there last week, and I met voters who are putting up signs for the first time, who are out knocking on doors. These are older women who never, ever in their lives have been politically active, and now they know the stakes are high.
And you're seeing on both sides?
Both sides.
Okay.
For the Democrats, stakes are high because of the money that's pouring into this race. You have a 30-year-old political novice who's never held elected office, yet he's managed to energize his base.
And this is the Democrat.
This is Jon Ossoff. This is the Democrat. Stakes are high because the money that's behind him, but also the energy in the Democratic Party. If he can win, that could help unite the party. That could help sort of energize them moving into the midterms. If he loses, the fear is that all this money, all this campaigning, all this frenzy
none
to
of
get
it's going to
votes
do any
won't
good.
matter, right? And so the wind would be taken out of their sails.
Okay, so the Democrats need this win because they're looking at the universe right now, and they're looking ahead towards midterms, and they're saying, we don't stand for anything. We don't have a platform. We are anti-Trump, but is being anti-Trump enough to get us elected? And that's what they're trying to figure out there.
Well, here's what's interesting, because Jon Ossoff is running in a district that is historically red. So he has distanced himself from the
since
anti-Trump
1979, right?
comments.
No one on the
held
left has won.
Johnny Isaacson, Tom Price. So he's distancing himself from this anti-Trump rhetoric, and he's really campaigning as a fiscal conservative. I asked him, because Republicans are saying, yeah, he's saying all this stuff about cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, about cutting spending. He's not really being honest. And I asked him, are you being honest? And he said it's time to make fiscal responsibility less of a partisan issue. He is championing these conservative causes. It's driving conservatives nuts.
You think about this universe we're living in, right? Where Donald Trump wants to spend money on things like infrastructure.
Right.
And you have a guy down there saying, no, we need to be more fiscally responsible. What I think it shows you is how political everything has become.
Yes, he's very crafted. He is towing the line. He's trying not to rock the balance, because this is a district of Republicans.
Okay.
And Republicans need this win because it shows not only that they can defend their home turf, that they can win despite millions of dollars coming in to be spent against them, but it's also a vote of confidence for Donald Trump. And when you talk to the voters on the ground, they acknowledge the fact that this is not about local issues. This is about what's going on in Washington.
Wow.
And Trump supporters on the ground want Karen Handel to win because they want to give Trump one more House member to advance his agenda.
It's very close right now.
Very close.
And the Democrats in the lead, but if we've learned anything from polling, it's that you don't necessarily need to buy that or believe it. One other interesting thing I think about this race is that you have a lot of early turnout. There's a lot of early votes that have already been turned in. That typically helps folks on the left.
Well, yes, except it's summer, and I was just speaking to the Secretary of State's office. They can't even give you an estimate of what they expect for turnout, because this is such a crazy race. They say it's unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this. One county official said 55% could be the amount of turnout, which is just absolutely nuts for a special election in June when everyone's on vacation. So early turnout may just be up because people are out of town. But I think it's up because this race is unlike anything we've ever seen for a special election.
Shelby Holliday,
we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much. We have some sad news to bring everyone right now. Just breaking. On a warm wire of the American held in. A group in Colorado has started a campaign to ban the sale of cell phones to children under 13. The ban would require retailers to ask customers the age of the primary user of the phone. Retailers who don't comply could be fined $300. Liz Stearns loves this idea, but Danielle McLaughlin does not love it. Liz is CEO of DivaMoms.com, and Danielle is an attorney and author. Good to have you both here. Thank you. Look, I don't like the idea of kids on phones. I don't like the idea of me on phones when I'm around my kids or my husband either, but that's our choice, right? Do I want the government somehow putting in a law saying, no, my kids can't have a phone? What if it's an emergency?
No, so we don't want the government involved. However, I do think that parents need to be responsible for themselves and for their children and know exactly what's going on. And the parents are the ones that need to be responsible to say, hey, we don't want you on social media all the time. We're going to take we're going to do certain things at home to make sure that you're not looking at it all the time and that you're not on it all the time. It's the parents' responsibility. I think it starts there.
Makes sense?
I totally agree. I'm the liberal here, right? So you would think that maybe I was for this from a public health perspective, the idea that these things can be harmful to children, right? I've got a 2.5-year-old. I hate the amount of time that she sees a screen, and I'm doing my best to limit it, right? But communicable diseases, safety, water safety. There are things that I think government is rightfully doing in terms of protecting us, but this is a job for parents. This is, if you take this away from parents, I think it disincentivizes them to do the right thing.
And who's to say your 12-year-old doesn't need that phone? What if it's an emergency? Exactly.
Right. But I also think, too, and going back to this, if parents want to start groups and they want to do things where they can say, okay, social media should just be X amount of hours or stuff like that, then that's a different story. But to get the government involved and for the government to say that they can't buy, phones for children under 13, it's not going to work.
And that retailers will be fine. No, it does. I think we're all on the same page with it. Kind of crazy. But you know what? It tells us sort of the state we're in, right? As a country, the fact that people are always on their phones, and kids are getting shortchanged in all this, aren't they, Danielle?
Yeah, they are. I think about the amount of time that I'm on my phone. I'm on Twitter. I'm spending time that's not spent with loved ones. I'm not doing anything particularly productive. I'm just my gaze is averted, and I think it's something that I certainly need to work on. There's a couple of things I'll say is that when we have these debates about the extent to which government should be involved in this kind of a thing, I think we undercut more important public health discussions. Right. So I think that's a real problem, especially for people on the left. And the other thing is this is a ballot initiative. So the people of Colorado will ultimately decide what they want to do here. But I guess we'll have to watch and see what happens.
I think we should all, make an effort, a concerted effort to put the cell phones down, to focus on the people around us.
We need to also really make a conscious effort. I call it getting off the grid, right? And putting it down and knowing that, for instance, now when I get home from work, my phone goes into the kitchen and it doesn't go, when I go to bed at night, I take my son's phone away, my phone, it all goes away. I'm not when I first got my phone, I wanted to be connected all the time. Now I want to disconnect. And we need to
Ain't that the truth? All right, well, good for you. We should all make a commitment to that. We are going to disconnect when we go home tonight. Thanks so much, Danielle and Liz. We'll have more after this.